They were driving excitedly toward a Hawaiian island for vacation when a couple suddenly waved from the roadside, asking for a ride. Out of kindness, Jack slowly pulled over. But Amy thought it was risky and wanted to refuse their request. While they were still discussing it, the couple climbed into the car without hesitation, begging to be taken to a beach 10 miles away. Seeing this, Amy said they weren't heading that way and signaled Jack with her eyes to back her up. Noticing the man's harsh stare and tattoos, Jack felt uneasy and quickly turned them down. Just as the couple was about to leave, Daisy refused to give up and pulled out her travel photos to show Amy. The photos quickly broke the ice between them, and Amy agreed to give them a ride. But just as Daisy cheered with excitement, Sander felt he was being toyed with and angrily told her to get out of the car. The mood instantly turned icy, and Jack didn't dare to linger. Driving off in a hurry, they soon reached their destination, and the beautiful scenery quickly washed away the awkward moment as they excitedly started hiking through the mountains. But while passing a narrow path along a steep cliff, Amy slipped and fell toward the edge. Luckily, a passing hiker grabbed her in time and pulled her back to safety. The act immediately earned their gratitude, and they thanked Bailey and invited him to join them. During their chat, Bailey learned that Jack was a screenwriter and excitedly said he was a huge movie fan. He eagerly asked about Jack's previous work, but Jack awkwardly admitted he was just starting out. Just as the three were excitedly discussing movies, they ran into three female tourists desperately trying to find a signal. When they approached to ask, they learned a chilling piece of news. Not long ago, a brutal murder occurred on a neighboring island. The victims were a newlywed couple on their honeymoon. According to the police, the killers were also a young couple and had likely fled to this island. The news made Jack and Amy tense, and Jack immediately suggested cutting the trip short and leaving. But Amy was having too much fun to leave, saying there were so many tourists that the killers wouldn't dare come here. Even Bailey didn't seem too concerned, and warmly invited them to visit the secret waterfall where he and his girlfriend were camping. When she learned there was a beautiful waterfall ahead, Amy eagerly accepted the invitation. Jack wanted to keep objecting, but then he unexpectedly spotted Sander and his partner searching around for something. That immediately made him uneasy, but he still changed his mind and agreed to go with Bailey. After walking along a trail covered in vegetation, they finally reached a secluded waterfall. In the pool below, a woman was relaxing in the sun. It was clearly Bailey's girlfriend, Annie. Seeing this, Amy couldn't wait to strip down and jump into the water. Enjoying the moment with Annie, Jack, however, remained uneasy and went up above the waterfall, trying to get a signal to look for clues about the murders. When he opened a news page, he found a report about a couple murdered on a nearby island. The killer had not only brutally removed the victims' teeth and fingerprints, but also taken all their clothes and jewelry. The only clue was a blurry photo, and at that moment, the signal started cutting in and out. Just as he raised his phone to search for a signal, Sander and his partner appeared behind him without a sound.
A few people die out here every year. They just stand under a waterfall, hit by some fallen rock, or maybe they just slip and go right on over and vanish. Who knows how, huh? Or even why? Could be the wages of sin.
Sander's words froze Jack in place. Thinking of the killer couple from the news, he instinctively stepped back, but they kept closing in on him. At that critical moment, Bailey suddenly appeared behind Jack, breaking the tension. Jack quickly led Bailey away, and to avoid any further conflict, the four decided to head to a nearby beach. While Amy was packing her backpack, she suddenly realized their beach permit had gone missing. Jack noticed Sander's backpack nearby, and recalling their strange behavior, he immediately suspected they had taken the permit. He rushed over and started searching, only to unexpectedly find a prison release document. Realizing something was wrong, Jack abandoned the search for the permit and hurried everyone away. On the way, they brought up Jack's job as a screenwriter again, and Bailey excitedly offered to provide material for his new script. He recounted his time in the Special Forces, explaining how a landmine had injured the back of his head during a mission. Fortunately, he survived after emergency treatment, but a titanium plate was implanted in his skull. He then excitedly showed them his scar and the knife he always carried. Seeing the sharp knife, Jack and Amy couldn't help but grow tense again. Using a bathroom break as an excuse, they went behind a large tree and quietly pulled out a phone to check the news. The killer's photo finally loaded, but because of poor quality and angle, the face was impossible to make out. Jack thought the male suspect's build looked very similar to Bailey's, and suggested they find an excuse to leave later. Before they could come up with an excuse, a sudden downpour began, forcing the four to camp there for the night. As they hurried to set up the tents, Annie suddenly sensed a figure moving through the trees. The others rushed over to check, and soon Bailey relaxed again, saying it was just a goat. He then pulled out a crossbow and invited Jack to go hunting. Though reluctant, Jack picked up an axe and followed. With the confusing trails, heavy rain, and pitch-dark sky, Jack soon got separated from Bailey. Holding the axe carefully, he searched for Bailey and suddenly noticed a faint light ahead in the woods. When he moved closer, he saw Sander and his partner had eerily appeared there again. The terrifying feeling of being followed froze him in place, when sudden footsteps sounded behind him. Panicking, Jack raised the axe and rushed forward, only to realize after knocking him down that it was just the shop clerk from the foot of the mountain. It turned out they had accidentally left the permit there earlier, and the clerk had come up the mountain to return it. Realizing his mistake, Jack quickly apologized and hurried back to the camp. Not long after, Bailey returned carrying a goat, and Annie immediately grabbed a knife and began preparing it. Watching Annie's skilled movements, Jack and Amy couldn't help but feel uneasy. Although Annie explained she used to work at a butcher shop, Jack and Amy still suspected they might be the killer couple. That night, Jack and Amy hid in their tent and agreed to find an excuse to leave first thing in the morning. Fortunately, nothing happened that night, until the roar of a helicopter woke them up. Several police officers were circling over the island in a helicopter, as if searching for something. Out of curiosity, they followed the sound to the shore and happened to see the police arresting the Sanders couple. Annie rushed over to ask if it had anything to do with the murders, but the police refused to answer, citing confidentiality. Before anyone could react, the police found a pair of pliers and a large number of teeth in Sanders' backpack. This evidence immediately exposed who they really were, and the police escorted them onto the helicopter. Watching the helicopter disappear into the distance, Amy and the others finally breathed a sigh of relief. In fact, they had all doubted each other during the trip, but now that the killers were caught, they went back to enjoying their trip. Jack even took out his camera and invited Annie and Bailey to take a photo together. When the four reached the beach, Jack asked Bailey to check out a nearby sea cave. Bailey was reluctant and wanted to stay with his girlfriend, but he agreed thanks to Jack's enthusiasm. Watching the two compete on the water, Annie picked up the camera to record a video. By chance, she came across Jack and Amy's wedding video, and out of curiosity, she sat down on the beach to watch it. After flipping through a few photos, Annie's expression froze. In terror, she dropped the camera and ran toward the shore. She kept screaming for Bailey to come back, but he was too far away to hear and only waved at her. Seeing Bailey turn to leave, she grabbed an axe nearby and ran toward the sea cave. Behind her, Amy picked up the camera and saw that the couple in the wedding photo looked nothing like Jack and Amy. It was now clear that the killer couple who had been among them all along were Jack and Amy. By then, Bailey and Jack had reached the sea cave, and Bailey lay back in the boat, taking in the view.
Shake that bush. What does that mean? What, some special ops lingo?
Kidding me? It's Paul Newman, Cool Hand Luke. Right before he breaks in the chain gang. You should know that.
I should, yeah.
Bailey smiled and took a sip of his drink, but as soon as he swallowed, he sensed something was wrong. As a screenwriter, Jack didn't even recognize that classic line. He pretended nothing was wrong and reached for his knife, while Jack stopped pretending and pulled out a gun, aiming it at him. Jack excitedly began telling Bailey about his crimes and the thrill of keeping up the disguise. Their real names were Andy and Mila. After killing the real Jack and Amy, they took everything from the bodies. Using the details they had learned from their victims, they successfully passed themselves off as the couple. His favorite thing was to brutally murder newlyweds, then pretend to be them to get close to his next victims. Because of her childhood trauma, Mila became deeply devoted to Andy and ended up becoming his accomplice. The Sanders couple were arrested because he secretly planted the blood-stained weapon and the teeth in their backpack. Then he told the clerk who returned the permit that Sanders was acting suspicious and asked him to call the police. That completely lowered Bailey and Annie's guard and successfully lured Bailey here. Before Bailey could react, he pulled the trigger, and Annie arrived just in time to see it happen. Seeing this, Andy fired several shots at Annie, but she managed to dodge them from a distance. Before she could catch her breath, Mila tackled her with a knife, and the axe fell into the boat below. Seeing Annie disarmed, Mila raised the knife and stabbed again, but Annie reacted in time and dodged it. The two immediately grappled. Despite Annie's desperate struggle, she was kicked hard by Mila and left unable to move. Mila quickly got back on her feet, grabbed the knife nearby, and charged at Annie lying on the ground. At the critical moment, Annie threw herself to the side, and Mila, overcommitting, tumbled straight into the sea. But the knife still stabbed into Annie's thigh. Gritting through the pain, she pulled it out and made her way to the edge to check on Bailey. Worried that Andy might still be down there, she carefully raised her phone and snapped a photo into the cave. But Andy was already gone, and Bailey had sunk beneath the water, leaving only a spreading stain of blood. Fighting through the pain, Annie searched for a way down, when her phone suddenly rang. Only then did she realize she had signal. She hurriedly dialed the police to call for help. Suddenly, a hand grabbed her ankle. Andy had quietly climbed up from below the cliff. About to be dragged down, Annie kicked him hard, then spun around and sprinted away. Andy pulled out his gun and fired several shots at her. Andy dropped to the ground just in time. When he stopped firing, Annie rushed in and drove the knife into his hand, and a piercing scream rang out. Annie took the chance to run without looking back, but Andy was soon chasing her again. Meanwhile, Bailey, who had fallen into the water after being shot, suddenly came to and struggled back onto the boat. The bullet had hit the titanium plate in the back of his head, sparing him from a fatal wound. Enduring the pain, he used a scarf to bandage the wound, then picked up the axe from the boat and went after Andy. Elsewhere, Annie struggled down the cliff using vines and ran straight into 4 lifeguards heading toward the sea cave. In a panic, she told them Andy had killed her boyfriend and was chasing her right now. Before she could finish, Andy caught up and even pretended to care, asking her what had happened. He then lied to the lifeguards, claiming Annie had taken a prohibited substance and that he had proof. As the 4 leaned in to check, one of the lifeguards noticed Andy's pupils and realized he was the one under the influence of a prohibited substance. Realizing his lie was exposed, Andy pulled out his gun and opened fire. The lifeguards fell before they could even react. Just as he was about to shoot Annie, he realized the gun was empty and hurried to reload, trying to take aim again. At the last second, Bailey arrived and swung the axe down at him. With a terrible scream, the two crashed to the ground, and Annie stopped when she heard it. When they came to, Andy ignored the pain in his hand, grabbed the gun, and fired at Bailey. But the wound was too severe. He couldn't aim at all, and could only watch as Bailey rushed in and took the gun from him. Just as Bailey aimed the gun at Andy, Mila arrived by police helicopter. It turned out that after falling into the water, Mila ran into some patrolling officers and lied, claiming she was a victim to lure them there. Seeing Bailey aiming the gun at Andy, the police mistook him for the real killer and trained their rifles on him. Meanwhile, Andy lay on the ground, provoking Bailey and trying to drag him down with him. At the critical moment, Annie rushed in and stood in front of Bailey. That finally snapped him out of it, and he dropped the gun. Watching the two embrace below, Mila suddenly realized she had been chasing a lie all along. Andy had only ever used her as a tool. She broke down, confessed everything to the police, and pointed him out. Just as Andy tried to reach for the gun on the ground, he was shot dead by the police. In the end, Bailey found the courage to take out the ring he had prepared and proposed to Annie. And so, the terrifying deception on the Hawaiian island finally came to an end.